NCSS Volunteer Management Network. I hope you have a good weekend. This is a very early morning session. The last session was in the afternoon, so I'm sure there are more participants, your fellow volunteer management practitioners streaming in slowly. I'm Brian, your host for today, and also to be the facilitators for the panel discussion later in today's session as well. For those who are already very familiar with the Volunteer Management Network, you will know that we will have some interactions with you online. And today we're also going to be using Slido for our interaction. If you are using your mobile phone, you can scan the QR code on screen. If you are actually using your browser on your laptop or your tablet, you can go to slido.com and the event code is 4234777. So it's 4234777. If you are actually joining this event using your mobile phone, please also try to have another device with you so that you can participate in the Slido during the event itself. We have actually designed quite a bit of interaction today so that we will have your full participation if you have another mobile phone with you. And at the speakers, we have 3 speakers today, and we will be conducting Q&A segment with the speakers after each of their presentations. For the questions for the speakers, you can type your question in the Q&A tab on Slido using the same link and using the same QR code I've provided you earlier on. In your questions, please indicate which speaker your question is intended for. If it's for all the speakers, you can actually leave the name out. Some of you may actually have similar questions for those that are already being asked, so you can upvote those questions. So we also select the questions based on whether it's being upvoted or not. The NCSS team as well as MPAC team will be moderating the sessions and the Q&A sessions. So we'll also be moderating the question being asked. The speakers will respond to as many questions as possible. But I hope you bear in mind that because today's topic is actually on volunteer role redesign, we might prioritize on questions related to those questions. For a question that is left unanswered, we will try to get the response from the speakers after the event itself. And for a question that is not directed to the speakers, but intended for NCSS, for example, you have any question related to volunteer management resources or any upcoming events for volunteer management practitioners, please type your question in the regular chat window. Only the speakers and myself will be speaking during the session itself. The NCSS team will also try to respond to your question in the chat window. As with both sets of questions, we will respond to your question as soon as we can during these sessions. If not, we'll be after the event itself. Many of you will be very interested in what's being presented today, and some of you might also want to read the slides as a refresher. We will be glad to let you know that all the slides used by our presenter today will be shared with you after the event. So don't worry, you don't have to do any screenshot, you don't have to take any notes. You can actually just relax, hear the presentation from our wonderful speakers today. Now, some of you are already very familiar with what is Volunteer Management Network. For those who are quite new to Volunteer Management Network, it is actually a network event organized by NCSS to provide volunteer management practitioners, like many of you in the room today, with opportunity to learn from subject matter experts, share best practices, and ignite collaborations within the social service ecosystem. Our theme for the 2020 Volunteer Management Network is Charting the New Horizon in volunteer management. Now, in line with the theme itself, we have actually designed 4 topics, and today's topic will be unleashing the potential of volunteers and the power of community through volunteer role redesign. So that's our topic today. We have 3 speakers lined up for you. The first speakers we have is actually Rupali, and if you are very familiar with Volunteer Management Network, you do realize that the Volunteer Management Network, we do have speakers from outside the social service sector who can offer different perspective on our selected topic. And Rupali Rupa, who is actually the ASEAN talent consultant leader from Mercer, she will be sharing with us on how role redesign is applicable in the commercial sector, private sector, and the social sector itself. Rupali have done extensive role redesign work in both the social and the healthcare sector in Singapore. She will highlight the benefits and challenges in job redesign and draw parallel to the volunteer role redesign topic, which is our main topic today. We also have Esther Chen, the volunteer manager from HCSA Community Services. HCSA have actually embarked on a series of volunteer role redesign activity to enhance the organization capacity and capability. She will share with us the journey, the organization journey in the volunteer role redesign. I'm sure it's very, very applicable to many of you here who are interested to do volunteer role redesign in your own SSA. Our third speaker today is Sim Tiong Kian, or TK, who is the Chief of the Silver Generation Office at the Agency of Integrated Care. Many of you might be familiar with the work done by the Silver Generation Office or their volunteers known as the Silver Generation Ambassador. TK will share how the organization redesigned the role of the Silver Generation Ambassadors so that the ambassadors can help support the health of seniors better. Now, we've also designed a hands-on activity today that we can do together virtually. We are trying this for the first time, so if there's some glitch in between, hope you bear with us, but it's intended so that you can be familiar with the basic, but some of the basic but critical steps in volunteer role redesign through this hands-on activity. Right, so these are the lineup we have for today with you for the next 2.5 hours. As part of the events registration, some of you might remember that we have actually gotten some questions to you and got your response to understand your experience with volunteer role redesign. Let's take a minute to see what you have told us as a group. Now, just to align just to make sure that we align on what is volunteer role redesign. Now, many of our SSA, the volunteer role redesign largely consists of two main areas. One is creating new volunteer roles. And what does that mean? It means developing new roles or redesigning existing full-time staff roles that will enable volunteer partnerships while alleviates the staff workload. So that's creating new volunteer roles. And I think some of you might be familiar with that. The second part of volunteer role redesign, or another crucial part of volunteer role redesign, is actually adaptation of the existing volunteer role. This means adjusting the existing volunteer role to better fit the agency's needs and also enhance their volunteer engagement. So these are the definition of volunteer role redesign in this context for today's event. Many of you have actually done volunteer role redesign, and you have actually shared your experience with NCSS through its various engagement platforms. So one of the key things, one of the key benefits about volunteer role redesign is that it helps SSAs to enhance and support the program delivery as well as the service user experience through volunteerism. It also enhances the volunteer engagement and experience in SSAs and create a stronger volunteer culture and retention. Third but not least, it also augments the human resources and alleviates the staff workload through volunteerism itself. So as you can see, volunteer role redesign, it's quite a list of benefits to the SSAs, the service user, as well as the staff in the organization, and also the volunteers. So let's take a look at what you have told us through the survey during the registration itself. Just a bit of background of who is in the room today. So about 70% of you are from the from the social sector. So 40% of you from the SSA agencies, 30% of you from NPOs. Nearly 20% of you are from the ministries and public agencies, whom I think many of you also work with volunteers in your own type of work. A smaller percentage of you are from the social enterprise and ground initiative, which I think also a lot of volunteers are involved. And we have a small percentage, 2% of you who are from the corporate sector itself. And many of you are either volunteers yourself or also actively leading volunteers in your own organization. So this is the profile of the participants we have this morning. We also asked you if you are familiar with the idea of creating new volunteer roles or adapting existing volunteer roles. So 42% of you said that you're very familiar with creating new volunteer roles or adapting existing roles. And nearly half of you have actually said that you have either created new roles or adapted existing volunteer roles for your own agency in the past 12 months. That's quite a large number, and that's encouraging. We went on to ask you about your own experience about creating or adapting volunteer roles. Out of those 112 of you who actually say that you have created or adapted volunteer role, Only 11% of you said it's very easy or quite easy. Some of you are not sure, so it's about 20% of you being neutral. And among those who have not done volunteer role redesign or adaptation, we also asked you the reasons why. 15% of you say that you do not know what is needed in the process, and another 15% of you said that you might not have the expertise. So hopefully through today's session, you gain some knowledge, feel a little bit more confident about doing volunteer role redesign, or at least get the exposure to the idea of volunteer role redesign. And it's also a good platform for us to learn together. For those who have actually done volunteer role redesign, feel free to chip in the chat window itself to share your experience with your fellow practitioners on who is with us today. Now, what are some of the top challenges? We have actually gathered quite a bit of feedback from you in terms of what are the challenges you face if you have actually done volunteer role redesign, creation, or adaptation. Now, starting from the right of the screen itself, 34% of you say that setting the scope of the new role or the adapted role or meeting the expectation to fit the need of the organization is a huge challenge. And another 24% of you say that the lack of clarity, resources, and knowledge for role redesign is one of the challenges that you face. 17% of you say that the buy-in from relevant stakeholders, be it staff, your program staff, your other staff, the management team, the volunteer, is a challenge itself. And of course, quite related to that is 30% of you say that the challenge is managing changes or the resistance to the changes as part of the process. Last but not least, 13%, another 13% of you say that educating the new redesigned role to volunteer has been challenging. So hopefully through today's presentation from the three speakers itself, you get a glimpse of what are the ways that you can overcome some of these challenges being shared by your fellow practitioners. Now, obviously, there are benefits. We mentioned the benefits previously, and it's actually the same benefits that many of you have actually expressed. Again, from the right-hand side of the screen itself, many of you say that 45% of you say that it enhances the volunteer engagement and also strengthen the experience for a stronger volunteer culture and retention. It definitely helps SSAs, your agencies, to enhance and support the program delivery and also the service user experience through the volunteers and their work. And last but not least, it also helps to augment human resources and alleviate workload for the staff through the volunteerism itself. So these are three consistent benefits that you have reported, and is also what NCSS foresee when agencies or the practitioner execute or implement volunteer role redesign accurately and efficiently. And last but not least, I just want to pull out some of the data that NCSS has shared with us. This is actually a data from the volunteer sector survey done in 2021, just last year. And NCSS discovered that 63% of the SSAs agree or strongly agree that volunteers have taken roles that allow their staff to focus more on critical work. And 53% of the SSAs agree and strongly agree that their agencies has leverage on the skills-based volunteers in supporting their organization functions. So as you can see, and many of you probably already experienced firsthand in your work, that volunteering and volunteerism actually brings a lot of benefits to your SSAs and to the service users. Right, so there's quite a bit of information I've shared with you. This is information shared by you as you registered for the event today. Maybe we can invite you to share from a quick thought on how you feel about what is being shared early on as a collective wisdom, right? So can I invite you to join me in this Slido poll itself, either scanning the QR code on the screen or joining us on Slido on a browser using the event code 4234777. And we want to hear from you. The very first question that we have for today with you. Use one word to describe how you feel about creating new volunteer roles or adapting existing volunteer roles. Okay. So this is a word cloud. It sounds like that's a lot of you feel that's very exciting, right? That's quite of excitement there. Yes, there's a bit of effort because you're going to involve a lot of stakeholders. Right, there's a lot of people talking about it being challenging, but also curious about it. Thank you for your submission so far. Yes, it's a lot of work because you're going to manage a lot of people involved in the process. But the end result is also creating a volunteer role that is new, that is exciting, that's engaging, that will benefit your volunteers, benefit your organizations, and also benefits the service users. So quite a lot of good thoughts around that. All right, any more? I'm going to leave it maybe for another second. Okay, so I think challenging is still the biggest thing that is on screen right now. That's the beauty of work cloud, can tell us what's a collective thoughts. But don't worry, hopefully after today's session itself, you will find it less challenging for you and more interesting or exciting, that you'll be inspired to start thinking about volunteer role redesign in your agency. Thank you so much for your thoughts. I'll just move on. Now, I'm going to invite our first speaker. Our first speaker is actually Rupali Gupta. Rupali Gupta is actually the ASEAN talent consultant leader from Mercer. I've personally worked with Rupali on a healthcare sector project for the past 3 years, and I can tell you that she has very rich experience in designing and delivering job role redesign projects in private, in public, as well as non-profit sector. Rupali is going to highlight the benefits and challenges in job role redesign and draw parallel to volunteer role redesign, which is our main topic today. A quick reminder, her slides will be shared with you after the event itself, so you can just relax and hear Rupali share her thoughts and experience. And also, as you listen to Rupali, feel free to enter your questions in the Q&A tab on Slido. On your mobile phone or on a browser, you will see the tab under Q&A. You can send your question there directly. All right, so sorry. So I'm going to invite Rupali to come on screen, and so that we can hear from Rupali and hear what she has intended to share with us. Rupali, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and happy Monday. I'm going to start sharing my screen. It may take a couple of seconds. So, as we get there, Brian has done a very kind introduction. Thank you for that, Brian. And thank you for having me today.
Thank you.
So, as we were preparing, the first question to my mind was volunteer role design. How is it going to be different? The short answer is it is no different from any role redesign. In the run-up, the survey results that Brian's already shared, I think all of you know the benefits. Some of you have given it a shot, some of you have found it challenging, and that word cloud of challenging, that doesn't change from whether you're doing redesign for your volunteers or whether you're doing it for your employees. It's exactly the same. It is a challenging process. We need to do it because there's a burning platform. What is the burning platform? I'll come to it very quickly, and I'm sure you know it. A lot of, what I'm saying is going to be drawing parallels, probably telling you some things you already know, asking you to think about a few things you may not know, and definitely getting you to reflect on, the parallels, the learnings, and the benefits. So in my quick 20 minutes, let's start with, and that's just me, in case you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, there's a QR. We love QR codes. We love reasons to bring our phones out. And let's think about, jobs. And like I said, right, I'm not talking about volunteer redesign, but I'm drawing parallels for you. Jobs have always been changing. A lot of us remember those old days when, trunk calls were made and there were telephone operators who were making connections. To getting more digital phone lines, to finally being able to call from, our wrist or our phones, little devices that don't need any human intervention in between. So the question is not about where did the jobs go? The question is, where are they going? And role redesign, whether it's for your volunteers, whether it's for your employees, whether it's for an organization, is constant. It's a journey. It's not a destination. And the reason it's a journey is because by the time you think you've reached to your destination, the milestone has changed and you'll be back on a redesign. So what's really, really important today is to get this notion of things are evolving. We're living in a world that's changing massively. And the question is, how do we adapt? So coming to the content as well as the context of jobs, both are changing, right? When you think about the automation and the impact that automation has on jobs and on the workforce, yes, it may be lower in the social, in the social setting. It may be far higher in an accounting or a, white collar job. And what people thought in the past was machines replacing humans in the blue collar space. That's no longer true, because machines are able to think, they are able to predict for lawyers, they are able to process large volumes of data for accountants. They are even able to conduct surgery for doctors. So from easy, simple, hard to super complex, machines are able to augment and support humans everywhere in that cycle. And really two things are happening. On the first, jobs and the context, what you see on the left-hand side, jobs and the context is changing phenomenally. And that's changing through how automation is impacting the core tasks on the jobs. And on the second hand, on the right-hand side, what you see here is that the nature of work is changing. So what used to be very transaction-oriented, high volume, very, very focused on relational, less on expertise, is shifting very quickly to being more relational-oriented, more expertise-oriented, and fewer transactions, because RPA, automation, and a lot of that is taking care of a lot of the transactions we did in the past. So both the context, the role of automation, and the content of jobs are changing. That brings us to why should you redesign your volunteer role? I think some of you already called it out very nicely in your survey. You understand the benefits, you understand the problems, and you're very clear about the challenges. But simply from an external, from my perspective, when I look at it from the outside, for some reason, there, my slides are coming. Across organizations, everywhere, not just in Singapore, but globally, there's high attrition, there's a shrinking workforce, and a smaller employee base. On the second hand, with inflation, costs are increasing. You have a contract worker, either contract workers, contract workforce, or contracted services. And the cost of all of that is increasing. What are you left with? You're left with this opportunity to engage volunteers for three things. One, because they have a heart for the sector, they care, and they're turning up because they want to make a difference. Two, because it's a cost-effective population. Obviously, it's very, very challenging, and I get your challenge right from how we design this role to how we communicate it, to how we set it up, to how even we find volunteers on a predictable basis so that they turn up and things function the way they are supposed to. At the same time, it's also very important to keep them engaged. Why should they wake up and come today? What should they look forward to? How could they contribute, and what impact they make? Those are all questions you need to think about in your process. So big opportunities to engage with the volunteers. And we can't make this shift if we use the same mindset that we've used in the past for creating the way work runs, right? Google is fantastic. People don't lie on Google. When you go in and when Google consolidates all the search data, you think about how people feel about their jobs, right? It's boring, meaningless, too stressful, making them sick, creating a lot of depression, anxiety, stress. And the reason jobs are designed the way they are today, and these are all jobs, right? Whether it could be a volunteer, it could be a job in the organization. The reason, firstly, managers design them. Why do managers design them like that? Because jobs are set up for efficiency and for efficiency/productivity and for hitting outcomes. Work needs to get done. How do I cut it in a way that it's predictable, people scale very, very quickly, and it's repeatable so that people can scale? And as a manager, I am guaranteed of the outputs and the outcomes I get in a productive manner, right? So that process of efficiency, or the only sole focus on efficiency, is what makes jobs boring. And then if we start to think about how do we redesign this? How do we break this cycle of productivity alone? So we start with looking on what is on the left is what I call the trio of look at the work, don't start at the task level, look at what is the holistic work that needs to get done. With this work and at a unit of work, when you consolidate all the work that's getting done across a bunch of roles, in the context that you operate in, thinking of your beneficiary experience, thinking about, the people who are impacted, thinking about employees, thinking about all the stakeholders, all the work that's done. Think about for each of those, when you break that work down into tasks, for each of them, what is the role of technology? Does it exist today? Can technology automate? Can it augment? Can it replace? Or can it transform the way that work is done today? So there are 4 roles, 4 potential possible roles technology could have. And then come down to who needs to do this? What role, what job? Is it a volunteer? Is it staff? And for good reasons. Ultimately, what we are aiming to as we balance this work, technology, and job / role / project, gig, there's a new way of looking at how that work gets done. The outcomes are no different from what the private or the public or even the social healthcare sector is looking for, right? We're looking to increase value of the jobs that we have in play today. We're not saying forget about productivity. We are improving productivity, but also balancing a load of other variables. It gives you agility and flexibility in your workforce. You can enhance career pathways. So people have, growth opportunities. They have a future. They have skills that they're learning. There's increase in employee satisfaction. You're able to unlock new talent pools. All of this to future-proof both the work and the environment, and to increase localization in your context. So those are some of the benefits and desired outcomes that any project for redesign start with. You could have 2 of these, you could have 3 of these, you could have literally 1 of these in your problem statement as you solve. So that's for you to decide and design the purpose of your project as you start on them. Coming on to, I just wanted to share a little bit of a framework, and this is Mercer's point of view on, if you see, we call it connecting talent to work. This is not filling jobs. This is not about filling positions, but it's really about connecting talent to work in a different set of ways and opportunities. And organizations are on different spectrums on this. Where you see a lot of organizations today is on the left-hand side, which is here in the fixed mindset. This is really about employees being in fixed roles, fixed jobs, full-time employees. Again, it's either because of legacy, history. This is how we've always done work. It could be because the volume of work fits, a regular job, or there are compliance reasons. In the middle, what you see, and organizations are moving towards it, is a flex model where employees are in flexible roles. Some of these are partially fixed, so I could have a full-time job, but I also have 20% of my time focused around projects. So I flow to solving problems that are needed, to doing things that emerge from, external reasons, and it's about taking additional project work on top of existing roles. And the last model to the right, as you can guess where this spectrum is going, is a flow model, where employees or individuals or talent flow completely to tasks, not even projects, but tasks, assignments, and or projects. Capabilities that are different, somebody could require one specific task that needs getting done every single day. And this could be, a gig that somebody comes to, the volume is high enough, somebody comes in, spends an hour, 2 hours, does it, goes away. You could think about data scientists on the higher end of the spectrum, where they work on projects and they move around project to project. When you think about COVID and the impact and everything that people had to do, one-time infection control, one-time policies, processes, communication, data gathering, where are people, how do we keep them safe? These were all special projects that benefited from employees or talent flowing to solving these problems. Increasingly, it's not like one model is better than the other. We're seeing organizations use a mix because you need both. You have full-time jobs that keep the lights on, that keep the business functioning, and you have special projects that need getting done. And if and when organizations move to utilizing their talent pool, and for you in this sector, volunteers are one part of that talent pool. When you utilize them well, When they work to solve the business problem, some of you already talked about, we don't know whether it's meeting the business objectives and outcomes in your survey. That's exactly the hard part of connecting the purpose to the business problem, to the outcome, and the way the role plays out for the population. Lovely. So there was a chat that's reminding you, as you have questions, please send them to Slido. With that, I'll move forward. And again, when you think about role redesign, it's a transformation. Most transformations fail. 70% of transformation efforts fail. Why? For three big reasons. And some of you have already highlighted this in your survey in one shape or form. The first is lack of buy-in from stakeholders. There's usually more than just the business leadership that are stakeholders of a solution. There are adjacent roles, there are department heads, there are external stakeholders, there could be government agencies, multiple stakeholders based on the type of business and the kind of impact you're trying to make. The second reason is lack of integration with processes and jobs. So you could have this change. The change could be transformative. It could be a change in the business model. It could be a change in the service you provide, or it could be a technology you implement. As long as any of those changes stand in isolation and are not linked either with process or with jobs and the people who execute those processes, that's the second reason of failure. And the third, again, some of you highlighted change management. Is ultimately lack of upskilling. My job has changed, my context has changed, new technologies come in. If as an individual, I don't know how to execute it, if I'm not upskilled to deal with it, or if change management at a macro, at my individual level or at an organization level is not managed, that becomes the third reason for why transformation efforts fail. So what can you do about it? You could start with, I have a solution. I have a starting point for a solution. Simple framework. Understand your change momentum. Why are we doing it? Is it logical? Is it emotional? Is that change desirable? How do we communicate it such that it's logical, emotional, and desirable? Here's what's changing. Here's how it's going to make an impact to you. Here is how your life becomes better. And that's the beginning when you need to get momentum on the change. So you align your stakeholders, you engage them, you communicate, you enable them to do their jobs in a new and different way. And finally, to sustain on the right-hand side, to sustain that momentum, you need to make it tangible. Here are three ways life has changed. And you need to make it natural, where it just becomes a business as usual and a normal way to approach things to activate and keep the change momentum. Obviously, I'm a consultant. We love templates and slides and a framework, which is what it is, right? So it's really managing change at two levels. One is at an individual level, and the other is at a broader enterprise level. And enterprise comprises of multiple individuals working together, right? So here's a nice little journey that makes it tangible for you, that gives you, a nice little way of understanding what I mean by logical, emotional, desirable, tangible. Think about the person who's getting impacted, Sarah, in this case, she learns about some changes that are coming. She's anxious, but she learns more about, watching some videos, promotional videos. She now is asked to join a team that's co-designing. So now it's suddenly desirable for her because she has a role to play. It starts becoming tangible, during team calls, she learns about specific processes, specific things that are changing. She has concerns, she raises them, she gets them responded, and she really feels ready to manage the change, applying everything that she's learned. So coming to, bringing this to a wrap, I think I'm right on time. How do you get started? How do you design or redesign your roles for volunteers? There's a guide, and I know we are moving into it very quickly. So there will be the launch of the guide and some hands-on activities. But some simple mechanisms, simple ways you could start is by looking at and reducing your transactional work, reviewing your processes. Look at ways you could implement technology. Move on to identify new tasks that uplift or leverage capacity. The last thing we want is for staff to be looking at, here's my job, here are all the things I don't like about my job. Let me push it to a volunteer, because that's a recipe for disaster. You will not get somebody who wants to do everything that staff don't want to do. So it's about curating and identifying tasks and that role of the volunteer to be meaningful enough for that volunteer to ask themselves those questions. Why should I wake up? How can I contribute? What impact can I make? Finally, retain impact, value, and meaning in the volunteer role and plan for implementation. What does that mean? That means for thinking about how this role is today, what are the aspects that make it attractive or not today? What are the aspects we can add or remove to make that role impactful, valuable, and meaningful for a volunteer tomorrow? Where do we find that pool of volunteers? If we're running short of them, how do we refill? How do we communicate? How do we activate? That is everything that goes into planning for implementation. And how does staff work with volunteers? How do they, how are they welcomed? How are they taken in? How are they impacting both the beneficiaries as well as staff? So think about that whole end-to-end value chain of entry to exit for volunteers. And in the interest of time, what I'll do is I'll talk to you about one of these examples. But what I wanted to show you was 3 examples, one for a hotel, private sector, one for special needs education, public sector, and the third, what Brian and I are working on together, which is in the long-term elder care model. Very different problem statements. The common thread was not enough people. It's very difficult to attract and retain talent. And the solutions vary. So in a hotel, we implemented automated check-in, check-out counters so that a lot of that is automated. Guests are doing it by themselves. In the process, the largest impact was on high productivity because staff is now productive, upselling, cross-selling, engaging with guests rather than, scanning passports and doing paperwork behind the desk. In a special needs education setting, we adjusted and we really looked at the teaching assistant role, looking at career pathways and roles, looking at how these teaching assistants need to get updated, what new competencies they need, how do they, in the context of that new job, get paid, what is the job evaluation, what are the salary recommendations for them. And really the outcomes we saw were improved job attractiveness, better wages outcomes, and capability enhancement. And finally, in the elder care sector, we're working with the support care role. And we're looking at how do we create a new role that is meaningful, that has a long-term runway, that has growth in the sector, improves job attractiveness, increases the value of the job, increases not just the wages, but also the contribution and the output and outcome from workers. That brings me to my last slide in wrapping this up. And our reflections really point to 3 things. The first is, I started with this. It's a journey. Because it's a journey, phase out your transformation. All the change that you want on day 1 and you aspire for on day 1 is not happening on day 1. How do you phase it out? What are the quick wins? What are the medium term? What are the long term wins? Get used to this, pilot a few places, gather input, gather feedback, ask, lots and lots of listening. That's point 2. Engage with the job holders, engage with your volunteers, actively involve them in this journey. Ask them lots and lots of questions. Why do you do this? What engages you about your current job? What do you want to do more of? What do you want to do less of? And incorporate that into your design. And finally, upskill. Have realistic expectations of your volunteers, of your staff in terms of what they could develop. Give them a safe environment to learn, acquire new skills, and develop. That brings me to the end of a really fast-paced, hopefully useful conversation around what are all the factors you can think about and how do you apply it in your roles and to redesign your volunteer jobs.
Thank you so much, Rupali, for offering the perspective from outside the sector. I like the way you also remind us that your perspective is a bit different from what the audience might be working in, but they're highly relevant and you really can draw parallel from what you are experiencing in the private or the public sector to the social sector, specifically in the volunteer space that many of our practitioners are working in. We have a few questions coming in on the Slido itself. I'm just going to get my team member to send you those in text, but I'm also going to read it off to you. Perhaps let's start with the very first question that is also upvoted by fellow practitioners. This question comes from Jeremy Lim from Beyond Social Services. I think this is in context, right? Because many of the job role redesign is intended to reduce the workload or allow the staff to take on more high value, more critical work itself. So Jeremy's question is quite relevant here, is how do we approach roles that enable more ownerships or leaderships in volunteers, but will still close to the service scope that is similar to the paid staff?
Lovely. I'm just reading that one more time to make sure I got the question right, Brian. So it's really about how do we approach roles that enable more ownership or leadership in volunteers?
That's right. Yep.
And may steer close to a service scope that can be similar, which is effectively saying when a role is similar to what staff is doing, but it's a volunteer role, how do we keep them engaged, right? So I think you have, and when you're working with volunteers, the beauty of it is you've got people who've got their heart into the problem statement that you are trying to solve for, right? So they've either got the heart for the outcome or for the beneficiaries or for the organization. And volunteers are coming from that place of, I have time, I want to offer my time, and they're coming from this space of generosity. The first, and there isn't, I don't have like a set of guides or rules, but it's really around when you've got a population that is so vested, it's very important to understand their capability, to understand can they deliver and how do we enable them. So it's really, the onus is on you on setting the context, agreeing and aligning with them on what they can contribute to, giving them guidance, input, feedback, and support, pretty much the way you would give your own staff. When staff need learning, you're making it available. When staff are burnt out, you're making mental health, support and wellness support available to them. So when you have volunteers who are working not for the money, consider and think about utilizing them well and giving them the support. And that support could be holistic. It could even touch upon benefits. But think about that. How do I integrate my volunteers into my core workforce and treat them at par with people that work for me?
Right. So it's really about this point about you mentioned in your earlier slides, it's really engaging them from the design phase to the trial phase, all the way to the implementation itself.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. And I think there's another one from Cindy. I don't know which agency, but Cindy asks, they find it challenging to teach senior volunteers new technology. How do we redesign this group of loyal volunteers to the other tasks? I think this is a common question for a lot of the practitioners here because they work a lot with senior volunteer, and senior volunteerism is really active in Singapore.
Correct. And that is a wonderful question. I'll again answer that with two parts. One is, Cindy, it's very hard to answer that specifically because I don't know the technology and I don't know what it is that they're finding hard. But there are two ways to do this, right? Either with the technology, the option and opportunity, and we are faced with this all the time, right? My staff don't speak English. They can, they can speak Mandarin. They don't understand English. They can't navigate an English tech. That's something I'm faced with every day. The question, and this is with hotels, this is with healthcare, and I see this coming up multiple times, right? So the question, and one of the ways, and one of the ways that tech vendors are responding with is they are making their UI UX simpler. So instead of text, technology is able to offer icons, bed changing done, for example, vital sign monitoring done. I'm just taking two examples, that kind of show you a visual, but moving to icons and visuals such that it is not language dependent, it's very intuitive. Some sort of basic training, if the tech can be simplified, how to use a smartphone, that is all stuff, I would still think we're not as old. We adapted to it very quickly. When I look at my daughter, she's 9, she's adapting super quickly and she's just second nature around technology. And then when I see parents, grandparents, they obviously struggle and they're fascinated with everything that a phone can do. But some basic training on how we are using technology, what goes into it, and simplifying technology. If neither of those are possible, which is where Cindy's question was pointing to, then let's think about the higher engagement, the EQ, and those sorts of tasks and roles. Again, it's back to asking, what is the volume or the population that is volunteering for me? What are the skills and capabilities they bring that I can utilize in my model? And then how do I fit it to work in my model?
Okay. Okay, that's helpful. And maybe the last question, in the interest of time, we might have to ask you to respond to some of this question in the written format later. Maybe the last question is whether it's role redesign for staff or role redesign for volunteer, it requires a huge amount of effort. You have actually shown us the steps. It's a lot. It's a complex work. It's a lot of work itself. How do we measure the impact of this role, the redesign role? In your opinion, how do we best measure that?
I'll give you a consulting answer to that one. And you may not need something as complex, right? It's back to defining success metrics. It's like saying, I'm implementing this new process or technology or role. What is it that I expect to see, right? So firstly, starting with your business problem and your hypothesis, centering around it. So I expect to see 10% increase in the number of volunteers. I expect to see volunteers doing or taking away XYZ kinds of tasks from my employees, whatever that scorecard is at the beginning. What is your hypothesis? What do you want to see? Setting that as your success metrics, tracking against the outcomes, and most importantly, what a lot of people forget in addition to the outcomes is also the experience. Focus on and break down the experience impact. How do my staff feel about their workload? How do volunteers feel about their role? How do my beneficiaries experience service different or better, right? So if you add on that layer of the experience, that kind of gives you a holistic scorecard to measure whether you're getting the benefits you aimed for or not.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Rupali, for your presentation and also answering some of the questions that we have. If there are more questions that you have for Rupali, keep that coming through the Q&A module itself. We will send it to Rupali so that she can respond after today's event itself. If not, do join me by appreciating Rupali for your presentation and your time with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's move on to the next segment. And the next segment is going to be something that we will do together. Just make sure I pull up the right screen as we speak. Give me a second. There we are. All right, so you have heard Rupali, right? And maybe we can get you to share your thoughts with us after the Q&A and your reflection on how you feel about what is being shared by Rupali. So what are your main takeaway from Rupali sharing on the volunteer role redesign? There are a few options here. You can help us to give us some of your thoughts around this few options that we have provided you. All right, so I'm sure that a lot of you have different types of takeaways. Some of you are choosing more than one, I'm sure. Look at the numbers that's coming through. But at the end of the day, it's really about, the key thing is volunteer role redesign will not just impact the volunteers, but also the whole organizations. And I hope that's something that you will take away from today. Some of you already know that, I'm sure of that. Some of you might also find new ideas on how you can take on volunteer role design in your organization. Now, just allow me to move on to our next segment quickly. Now, we are going to do a hands-on activity with you. This hands-on activity is actually based on the volunteer role redesign guide developed by NCSS. In the earlier pre-event announcement, you'll see those slides running. If you want, you can also find the guide itself on the NCSS resource webpage for the volunteer managers. Now, we're going to use a very specific part of the volunteer role redesign guide. In the guide itself, you will see there are a total of 5 steps. Clearly, we're not going to cover 5 steps today. Today, our main focus will be the step 2, which is to design the role of volunteers. And if you go on to the guide itself, you will see a very detailed explanation. What is the objective? What's the outcome? And in the guide itself, you also find there are some wonderful templates, worksheets that you can use to guide you through the process of volunteer role redesign. And this is the one that we're going to use today. It is slightly adapted from the worksheet that you will find as part of the volunteer role redesign guide itself. There are a total of 6 columns in this particular worksheet here that we can go through it together as a group today. So the first column is actually the role that you want to redesign. The second column is actually the purpose of why you want to redesign that particular role itself. The third column is the existing task, the task that is being done by the role they're intending to redesign. And then on the fourth column itself is the particular task that you feel is A, valuable, B, engaging and meaningful. There's a whole range of criteria we want to decide on, but this is really the task that you want to retain in this redesign role. Along the way, you might discover there are new roles, you might discover there are new tasks that can be created or added to this role itself. So that's another column for you to add on. Now, in your conversation, like Rupali said earlier on, as you engage the volunteers itself, the people who are doing the task itself, you might realize that some tasks is no longer that meaningful. You may want to remove those tasks from the particular role they're redesigning. Last but not least, quite straightforwardly, you would realize that in many redesign role itself, there are other roles that may be impacted. It might be program staff, it might be volunteers, it might be another volunteer role that is impacted by your redesign role itself, right? So you will also have to name them there. So what we're going to do today, as I said, this is the first time we're doing a large group activity virtually. So bear with us if we are not as smooth as we planned for. We're going to go through with you each of those steps there. We get you your input and go through each of those steps so that we can populate a worksheet like this on screen. All right, so this is where I get your help to go back to Slido, scan the QR code, or use the browser and enter the event code 4234777, and we will do this activity together. All right, let me know if you're ready, and we shall start the first thing. Now, this is a collective wisdom. I'm going to get you to tell me what volunteer role you think we should redesign together. Maybe keep it to the more common role that you think about, right? So some of the roles that you see in organizations that you really feel like is something that you want to redesign together. Keep it coming. So right now we have befrienders, which is the main thing. And then you have also some of you are probably doing with events management, program coordinating. So we have seen a few of befrienders, befriending still the largest one. Okay, so looks like quite a lot of you are hoping to redesign befriender roles together. Anything else that is different? Okay. Right, some of these roles are probably overlapping, right? Some befriendings are similar. Let me see, events planning, program coordinating. Wow, lots of roles going on. Looks like a lot of you wanted to do some things in your organizations already. Okay, let's assume that starts with befrienders, right? Okay. Now, I'm sure most of you are already very familiar with what befriender does. For those who might be a bit new to befriender, it literally means that there is a volunteer that you might assign to for a service user and journey with the service users with a specific objective. Okay, so let's stick with befrienders now. For those who have actually suggested befrienders, you'll be most helpful if you can actually give us more of your thoughts here. But for those who are new to the idea of befrienders, you can also chip in. So why do we want to redesign this role? What is the purpose? I'm just going to put on some music so that as you think, we have some thoughts. Remember, as you type in your reasons for redesigning this role or the purpose itself, enter submission, okay? Right, so you want to give more clarity, you want to enhance volunteer experience, improve the volunteer experience, empower the volunteers, right? Okay, that's quite a lot of information coming through. Right, so it's really about focusing on the volunteer, giving volunteers clarity, retaining them, making it interesting for them, and improving their experience. Well, I love the features on the Slido these days that give me a count on top. So it's very focused on volunteers. You can see on screen, it's really retaining volunteers, equipping volunteers in their roles. All right, I think that's good enough reasons for us to move on. So for those who are already working in volunteers or have understanding what is the volunteer befrienders role, tell me, what are some of the common tasks in this role? It's clearly befriender, but if you can deep dive into some of the specific tasks, that would be helpful. What are some of the common tasks that a befriender would do, right? So providing emotional support, initiating conversation, right? Maintaining regular chats, okay? Finding sponsors, okay? Talking to beneficiaries, right? Visiting, so maintaining frequent connection with the service users. Okay. Okay. All right, let's move on from there. Let's see how many of you are still sending in. So quite a lot of you really talking about engaging, listening to the service users. Right. Oh, so some of you might also be looking at befrienders as also potential leaders of befrienders, right? Okay. That's a lot of things that different befrienders would do. Okay. Now, maybe let's see, any more coming in? All right, I think we are good. About 50 plus entries so far. That's really good. Now let's move on to the actual task design itself. You will see the next step itself. So this particular step itself is actually looking at the common tasks for befrienders. All right. I just want to let you know that as we are going through this, my team member Min and team is also extracting some of the key points there. So from this point onwards, we will go a bit slower, so that they will have a chance to populate the worksheet for me, right? Okay, let's see if there's anything. Right, let's move on. So after hearing all the tasks that you have actually seen collectively shared by 50 plus of the participants, what tasks should this role retain? What tasks should be retained in this role? The role is befrienders, right? So clearly it's befriending. So specifically what task itself should be kept. So for example, I can see quite consistently hearing, listening to the beneficiaries, okay? Providing emotional support is one thing. Maintaining the regular contact with beneficiary, all right? Okay, so planning visits and contact point, that's a good point. Forming a bridge between the beneficiary and staff, okay? That's a critical role of befrienders. Okay, so some of your befrienders might be actually doing house visit to check on the well-being, right? Maintaining contacts between volunteers and public. Maybe that's not for befrienders, I'm not sure. But I'm hearing that some of you do get your befrienders to be sort of people who will provide pointing to resources, right? Apart from just providing emotional support, doing the regular visitations, right? Right. So befrienders in some contexts will also support staff by providing feedback and running the center events. Okay. Anything else that you feel that is really worth maintaining or retaining in the role of befrienders? See some of you still typing. I'm just going to let you enter your... Right, so befrienders also leads and facilitates activities, okay? Any other thoughts about what tasks should be retained in befrienders? right? It looks like it's largely centered around supporting, engaging service users, pointing them to the right resources, getting them to be integrated to the community, providing a bridge between the service users and the SSA staff, okay? Okay. Also, as part of the whole forming the bridge process, you also report any potential risks from the service user to the staff, okay? Documenting the needs of service users, providing case notes for service user, okay? And yes, some of them also offer practical help. So it's quite a wide range. I hope my team members is populating them effectively. This is quite a lot of information coming in. Right, shall we move on? Now, this is the next one, right? So remember, we have actually talked about the common tasks that's being done as a befrienders currently. We have just gone through what are the tasks that should be retained in the role. What are some other tasks we should add to this, right? But I note that we have said quite a bit there. What else do you think can be added to the role of befriender? We have to increase the music a bit as we wait for more people to come in. Okay, so some of you see that the befriender can take the role of leaders, program leaders. Okay, mentoring new befrienders. Okay, so for those who are seasoned or obviously skilled, they can actually take on a mentoring role. Okay. So some of them, you might also envision that befrienders can also take on the role to befriend the other volunteers. So it sounded like most of you see the role of befriender evolving if they are skilled or if they have the capacity or capability. They can actually become more active in supporting fellow volunteers as well, right? So there are additional quite specific tasks. Some of you say that your befrienders could actually offer to do medical escort, right? Depending on the setting, clearly. Some of you can also think that befrienders can, upskill the residents in digital literacy itself. Okay. So the befrienders are also people on the ground itself, right? Your direct contact with the service users, so they can also help to collect feedback and contribute ideas to the program. Okay. Any other thoughts about? Right. So befriend. Oh, sorry. My apology. Where was I? Okay. So we're also looking at how befrienders can help a staff to search for resources. Okay. So they're still tapping in. Right. Be an active observer to see how programs are being done. So apart from mentors to new volunteers or new befrienders, some of you also see that they can actually take on the role to be a co-trainer or co-lead in training. Okay. Right. I think that's quite a bit of information already. Let's look at what are things that we can remove from the befrienders role. All right. So you have you have shared with us what are the common tasks, what are the tasks you think should retain, what are the tasks that should be added. What are some of the tasks you think can be removed? This might take a bit longer for you to think about. This is probably something that might take a bit longer for everyone to think about what, in your own experience, after having to hear what's being shared, or in your own experience, what's being done by volunteers, befrienders on the ground itself. What are some of the tasks that can be removed from befrienders? Again, we do want to state that it might also be context specific, right? So we have coming in. So tracking their own service hour for internal reporting, that's a good point, because you might want to get them to focus on supporting the service user rather than being caught up in their own volunteer service hour recording. Okay. Yeah, so the Rupali earlier on says that many of the tasks that we do these days can be digitalized or automated. So administrative work sometimes can be done by technology. Okay. Complex, some of you are feels that the befrienders are not should be free from managing complex clients or having to deal with complicated case input, right? Okay. So by and large, I'm hearing from you that you do think volunteers do not need to be, befrienders do not need to be involved in administrative work. Okay, calling befrienders for events, okay. Dealing with service complaint about the agencies, okay. So that's something that the befrienders do not need to do, right? So what I'm sensing is that many of you feel that it's should be spending quality time with service users, not to spend time on administrative stuff, not to spend too much time that is with complicated cases that they may not be equipped to deal with, all right? Supervising staff, interesting, right? Should not be doing any task that is not your expertise, all right? Okay. Again, I think many of what you are sharing here is very context specific. It's also got to do with the profile of the service users or the course they're working on, right? So this is not a blanket thing that not all befrienders are not required to do certain things, right? Okay, I think we can move on in the interest of time. The last question I want to hear from you, to get your answers from, probably most straightforward here. Who will be impacted by this new role? Remember, your befrienders is obviously befriending your service users. So the first person who is impacted will be your service users or clients, or some of you might actually use that term itself. Who else might be affected by the new design role? Right, the befriended coordinator, basically the person who's in charge of the program itself, the caseworkers, the case manager, the volunteer coordinator of training yourself, right? Okay. Yes, I think we can quite rightly say that across, when you change a role, removing or adding new tasks to the role, it actually impacts across the board, whether it's the organization staff, the volunteers themselves, the service users, people who are involving in case management, everyone will be affected by it. If you look at the screen on top, it actually gives us a very quick summary of what the people that you have already named. All right, so I think this is what we have gotten so far. Anyone else feels that there's another group that will be impacted by this redesign role? Yes, volunteer managers will be impacted. Medical social worker will be impacted too, especially if you're working in a healthcare setting. Right, let's move on to see what we have put together. Right, I'm just going to stop share a bit, and then I'm going to make sure I pull out the right screen. There we are. So as we speak, as you enter your response in Slido itself, my team member on the side have actually started to populate this particular worksheet itself. So using this worksheet, just go through it very quickly again. The role that we have designed is befrienders, and the purpose of redesigning the role is adding clarity to the role, enhancing the experience, and improving volunteer retention. Some of the key tasks that you say is done by the volunteer befrienders now is actually providing emotional supports to beneficiaries. And the other one is also potentially developing them into volunteer leaders, right? I think there are quite a lot of things, including also pointing them to the right resources, connecting the service users to the community, also reporting back to the agencies on the health, rather on the situation or conditions of the service user because befriender form a breach, right? So that's the outlining of existing role. The retained role itself, you do feel strongly that the befriender should actually continue the support, provide emotional support, maintain the connections, maintain the engagement, form the bridge between the service users, the beneficiaries, and the SSAs, and then provide feedback and observation of the service users. So these are the things that you want to retain, right? This is what you want, what we think collectively, what you think befrienders can take on as additional role. They can take on the role as program leaders, support the other volunteers as mentors or befrienders, also help to upskill the service user in various means, right? Whether it's digital literacy or also providing medical escort itself. It's a bit of a repeat here, but it's actually to provide them to support the staff, right? Hearing the feedback from the service user and seek resources. And these are the roles, these are the tasks rather that you think should be removed. Largely very administrative, dealing with complicated cases, dealing with service complaint, or taking tasks outside expertise, right? And this is the last one. These are the roles, these are the people, stakeholders that be impacted. It will be the clients, it will be the service users, families of service users, the staff members of SSA. This might include the program coordinator, caseworkers or managers, and volunteer managers. All right, so effectively what we have done in the whole 15 minutes is going to review the second step of the volunteer role redesign using the worksheet that is included in the volunteer role redesign guide by NCSS. If you were to follow through this step itself, you should be able to get a good sense of how you should redesign your existing role. And obviously, you can see that just now when we do this collectively with 100+ of you, there's a collective wisdom. Many of you have different perspective. Many of you also have similar perspective. So our thoughts is that if you want to redesign role, definitely it will be helpful for you to do it together with different groups of stakeholders, being the program staff, being the volunteers that you're working together. Their buy-in is definitely necessary when you start the volunteer role redesign. And this worksheet itself will form a very useful guide for you to take them through the journey. All right, so this is the first time we have done it virtually together with a worksheet. The NCSS team has designed this. Hope it was fun for everybody. Maybe I will hear from you. How do you feel about the hands-on activity we just did together? I'm glad it has been useful. Well, it is the first time we are doing this, so I'm glad that it's useful and helpful to many of you. Yes, I completely agree with you. It's very interesting to see that there's the same role but very different views on the same role. I'm very glad that it's not so scary anymore. I think the second step is a very important step for most people. Right, so like I've said, that hands-on activity we have done together is the first attempt for us to expose some of you to this whole process of volunteer role redesign. So it's definitely helpful to hear from different perspectives for a very simple role that we're all looking for. Yes, I think we can extract those information for you, for those who are really thinking about redesigning your own befriender roles in your organization. We can actually offer those input for you. This is you probably don't have a chance to do it with 100+ practitioners. This is a very helpful collective wisdom. But I think the NCSS team might actually think about doing this exercise again with the other type of engagement related to volunteer role design. Okay, maybe the last step, last 1 minute to see if anyone have anything else to add to it. Like I said, this is the first time we are doing a virtual hands-on activity together, so I'm be very helpful for us to hear from you later if there's any way we can improve this. All right, so we definitely want to hear your reflection after at the tail end of today's event itself. Right, before I think it's a good time for us to start. Before we invite the next speakers to speak, the next two speakers to speak, maybe we can have do a group photograph together. Can I invite you to switch on your camera, put on the biggest smile so that our team can do a group picture with 100+ of you, nearly 200 of you here on screen. Right, I'm going to stop sharing so that we can all have our camera on. So if you are at your desk, can I invite you to switch on your camera so that we can see your exciting face? And my team members will be taking multiple shots. So I don't know which frame you will stay in, so do keep the smile as long as you can. It's okay for you to not to have your camera on if your camera is not working. Right, so most of you are volunteer practitioners, and this is a volunteer management network event itself. So we do want to stick up your fingers to show a V sign so that we know that this is a volunteer management event. Left, right doesn't matter as long as your V sign is up. All right, so Sean and Shikin, if you're taking pictures, let's do that. Right, big smile.
Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, wait. Okay, stay there. Another one. 1, 2, 3. Okay, and the last one. 1, 2, 3.
All right, we got everyone, Shikin?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for putting a big smile and also doing the experiment with us as well. Okay, let me know if you are showing, if I'm showing the right screen there. Okay, so we have two more speakers. The second speakers that we have is actually Esther Chen, who is the volunteer manager from HCSA Community Services. And Esther is going to share with us how the HCSA's experience in volunteer role redesign. This will be a very relevant perspective for SSAs who like to embark on their own volunteer role redesign. And I believe Esther is going to share a bit a role that is related to befrienders, if I'm not wrong, right? I'll let her share with you what she has in mind. But a quick reminder, the slides that Esther is going to use will be shared with you after the event itself. So relax, don't have to take screenshots. And if you have any questions for Esther, keep it coming on the Q&A tab on Slido itself. All right, so let me just invite Esther to come on screen now. Esther, over to you.
Hi everyone, I'm Esther. I'm volunteer manager at HCSA. I'm really pleased to see that there are so many of you from the various SSAs. So I just wanted to share, like every pilot project, my journey with this HCSA team is a work in progress. I'll be shedding some light on the behind the scenes, BTS for short. It may not always be pretty. Some of you have already tried role redesign. I think not many said that it's easy. Yeah, but that's really the reality. And it's part of what contributes to real learning for my team and I. So at the end of this, the choice is in your hands. Even the tools that NCSS has provided, whether it's something worth exploring in your organization. So before that, let me just set the context briefly about HCSA. So HCSA, we started in 1996 as a halfway house for recovering drug addicts and offenders. So we have our signature program, High Point. And then later we moved to our current premise in Geylang, a pretty good place with a lot of food nearby, right? And then after that, we had our second program, which is the Day Spring Residential Treatment Center for abused teenage girls recovering from trauma. So that's our second signature program that we reach out to this vulnerable group. And our third program is Day Spring Spin, which empowers single parents and lone caregivers with limited support. And finally, our youngest baby program in HCSA, it's called HCSA Academy. It was launched in 2018, and it's meant to equip the vulnerable with sought-after culinary skills. So at a quick glance, these are our 4 signature programs. So for HCSA, we embarked on this volunteer management capacity development. As you can see, it's quite a mouthful. So let's just call it the VMCD project for short, right? So why did we actually embark on this project in the first place? Well, these are the three key areas that we always kept in mind. Firstly was to co-develop roles to alleviate staff workload. I think that was something that was mentioned also earlier in the sharings, and also even in the survey, pre-event survey. Also, the other point was to leverage on volunteer skills and provide opportunities for volunteers to interact with service users. And of course, in this whole process, you also need the whole of organization effort and the buy-in. So that is something that was important as well in order for the role redesign process to be successful. So throughout, we always needed to keep the why in mind when we went through the whole project. So this pilot journey, all in all, took us about 1 year. Even it's just a pilot, right? And I started the project around the same time that I joined as a volunteer manager at HCSA. So it was in January 2021, last year. So you see that this project is clearly mapped into 4 phases with a few different touch points. And you notice that among the 6 touch points, each session has a focus, which builds on the previous session with the help of relevant tools, templates, and methodologies that were provided. In this case, we partnered with EY Consulting. So they provided us with the relevant tools. And then in between the touch points, there was also offline work, like really homework, in order that we can then share milestone updates in the next touch point. So in this journey, throughout, I had to always engage and follow up internally with my stakeholders. And it's really not just about executing, but also communicating to them the context, the rationale why we are doing this, and of course, making sure that it's aligned to what really meets their needs. And if you notice, the implementation phase, yes, it took the longest, not unsurprisingly. So here I would like to again recap the objectives, because that's something that really, keep us on the ball throughout this whole pilot. And for the roles listed here, we only piloted some. And for the purpose of this session, I'll be focusing on this lead ally volunteer, in other words, the lead befriender role, because I noticed that indeed it is something that is very common across SSAs, and having a lead role is also something very relevant. Notice also the rigorous considerations that we had for each of the roles, even as we planned out. So things like we had to consider role description, the risk and mitigation, stakeholders, implementation, and so on. So that really helped me and my team to cultivate good habits of articulating the processes in order to flesh out if something is actually being put into practice, if it's working or not, and why. So for this one, I wanted to illustrate on one of the aspects, which is the impact of role on other roles and existing processes. It's just so nice that it was also covered just now in the hands-on activity, right? So just let me illustrate with the example of this lead befriender role. In HCSA, we implemented it with the single parents in Dayspring Spin for the lead befrienders, and it actually impacted the role of the staff and social workers. So we had questions like, what needs to start in this role? What does the staff need to do? What do they need to stop doing as a result of introducing this role? What do they need to continue? And what are some actions or mitigations that can be taken? So for instance, they could be more involved in the regular meetings with supervision of the leads. That is something new because they didn't have the leads in the first place. But then they now need to stop doing their check-ins with the befrienders, because now the befrienders will be under the charge of the leads, who will then do the check-ins with them. Of course, because this is only a pilot role with the befrienders, the staff still can continue organizing some screenings, orientation, and training for other volunteers who are not befrienders. So in order to equip the lead volunteers to do the check-ins with the befrienders under their charge, staff would then need to take some action to guide the leads on what is their scope of work, and also provide some guiding questions for them to do the check-ins with the befrienders. So here's an example that I hope will give you a practical illustration of this very key aspect. So here's a summarized version of the role descriptions that we co-developed with EY. And I will be zooming in on the lead ally role again. And the reason is that for this lead befriender role, whoever plays this role, he or she will still continue in her befriending duties and be a role model to others. That's why he or she was selected. But really, it also involves operating in a greater capacity to lead as well, where leading broadly includes not just facilitation, but also some of the coordination aspects among leads, staff, and clients. So really, on hindsight, when staff was recruiting for this role, internally looking for suitable befrienders who could rise up, this criteria of having someone with experience in coordination work, we felt it could be better emphasized. And really, this is a shout out to Jeff. I saw you just now in the road taking, right, Jeff from SOS, because you mentioned this point earlier, and indeed it's really important, not just leading, but the coordinating work that will really help in elevating staff workload. So in terms of this pilot process, really what is key is because you are introducing something new, you want to look at the feedback received and then act on them appropriately in order for it to be effective. So some of the feedback that we received, for this lead befriender role was that the volunteers found it meaningful, and also staff helped to elevate the workload for staff. So let me illustrate with some examples. So for instance, this lead befriender role, when they came on board, they helped to co-create some of the befriending handbooks and also videos for the launch of the SPIN ally network of befrienders. And with these core volunteers, they also got to be more committed, more involved to brainstorm for the formation of these volunteer befriender groups by geographic regions, and then how to engage them and what the timeline would be. Then in terms of improvement, we had some feedback on what could be better. So one of the things was that staff, the lead volunteers thought that there could have been more clarity on what their roles were between them and the staff. So one of the things that the staff did was also to look at, when they have their quarterly get-togethers of the befrienders, we also considered to allocate very clear roles, like who is the RSVP IC, who is the icebreaker IC, and so on, so that even between staff and the lead volunteers who are helping to organize these events, that it is clear who takes what role. Another question, which I think is really common, not just for this lead ally role, but any role, is really commitment, right, among volunteers. So one of these things is commitment. We already had mentioned it at the outset in recruitment, but sometimes attrition can still take place due to external reasons. So for instance, there was a case of one of the lead because she's an expatriate and she had to relocate back to her home country. So that was something unforeseen that the program, my colleagues had to manage as well during this pilot. The other point was also about the quality of volunteer work, that it could be better, because now probably they're taking on a lot of new things. They have to be very adaptive. So if you recall, we mentioned that the volunteer leads, right, actually helped to co-develop videos and befriender handbook for the launch of this befriender network. So when it initially planned to launch it in September last year, it did not happen because of low signups. So it means that probably large group engagements don't really work. And there was a very strong need to pivot the strategy into small group engagements via the WhatsApp groups that were set up by geographic regions. But one challenge that we faced was the initiative from the leads were not very high, and they did so maybe to check in with the volunteers only with some prompting from the staff. So even as we look at areas that could be better, staff also reflected and say, well, maybe there are some reasons that we could examine further. Perhaps maybe it's a different skill set, from addressing volunteers at a larger platform. Maybe they even need some targeted equipping through the one-to-one engagement, either via WhatsApp or calls or text, that staff can better support these leads. And the other point could also be on the role clarity. Maybe there's still really room to improve, in the case of who will engage the members in the group. Because one thing that happened when we set up geographic WhatsApp groups was that within each group, there was a staff IC as well as the lead, a volunteer. So the question is, who is the one helming? Who is the one there? Is the staff supporting or not? So I think that was the part where it was good. There was some structure in place, but I think that was what we reflected on. Further communication could have been helpful. So all in all, really, for effective mitigation and improvement of feedback that we receive, there is an important need to uncover some of the underlying causes for the challenges encountered. So when the volunteer is in the role, here are some common likely risks and mitigations that we covered during the touchpoint meetings of the pilot. So there are a few different aspects here. So low engagement and turnover of volunteers, that was one of the key challenges that we experienced. So do you think that low engagement leads to turnover? Or, I mean, is there really a strong correlation, or it could be other reasons? Well, actually for HCSA, as you shared about the core volunteer engagement was pretty high. So when there was some turnover that we experienced, which I think is also common, whenever people curate roles, whether how long a volunteer can stay, even when there was turnover, it could be due to other reasons, not necessarily because of low engagement. So in HCSA case, the volunteers were very engaged. They were able to have meetings monthly, and the meetings was very targeted for them to be able to brainstorm and align on what are some common topics that they can share in order for them to actually flexibly engage their small group. So there is a guide, but at the same time, they are also empowered to be flexible in how they want to engage the small group of volunteers. So turnover, well, it was possibly because of the volunteers who were having other commitments, as I mentioned, some were relocated or other challenges along the way. So actually, besides lead volunteer attrition, there were also some other challenges which were not foreseen. So for instance, there were also staff that had to move on due to some staff renewal changes. And that also affected the continuity of the pilot group engagement and any rapport that had been built. So that was something that we needed to deal with, but staff took it in stride and managed this. So looking back, the focus of 2021 when we started the pilot really was to onboard, equip the volunteers, form groups and rapport building strategy in order for the volunteer befrienders in the group to be engaged. And then in 2022, with that foundation light, the focus was really to have sustained engagement through four quarterly engagements, where the first and fourth will be anchored by the staff, right, in HCSA through get-togethers. And then the second and third will be really own time, own target, led by the volunteer groups within their own group. So all in all, this approach would actually cover all four aspects of the outcomes that we hope to achieve through this pilot project. Well, but in reality, plans and reality do not always match. So as I shared very candidly and honestly, was that when we had some volunteer attrition and also staff renewal, it really didn't make a dent in all these plans. But we are still very thankful that there was some progress in 2022 to look back on. So on the second point, despite the quarterly engagement being postponed in the third quarter due to low sign-up rate, eventually took place in July. And that was something that the volunteers were able to learn about the research study outcomes of our SPIN befriending services. So that's where they were able to see the impact to service users. And then on the fourth point about staff volunteer partnership, we're thankful that with ideas from the social workers to actually connect with clients in a collective manner. For instance, maybe special needs children could be paired together with a befriender, and that will help them to be able to support in a community. So these are some ideas that we are still in the process of implementing, but it was a good start because the lead volunteer actually took initiative to bring it to her WhatsApp group on some of these further pilot ideas. So really, this is a snapshot of what we had envisioned in 2021. It has enabled us to explore various roles concurrently over short sprints. Since then, there are some priorities on these roles that have changed. And even for the lead befrienders, we also needed to consider some of the more immediate plans and also longer term plans. So immediate plans were like, looking out at rolling out to the role to more of regular befrienders who could then become leads to help to sustain the succession pipeline. They also needed to review the strategy with the small groups as well to see how they could be better engaged. And of course, on the longer term, really is how can this program be replicated to even the single parents on a larger scale. And finally, not just befrienders, but also this lead role can be implemented to perhaps leading among counselors or any other form of volunteering roles that will be helpful to have a lead. So last but not least, change management is key. It starts from the outset and needs to continue throughout the pilot. with various stakeholders, leadership, program staff, and volunteers. So for me, even with the SPIN program that piloted this, I liaised mainly with the program head, and that gave me, I was thankful to have quite strong buy-in in that case. So even there were some delays, in the implementation, as long as communications were made and clarification was done, we were still able to flexibly implement it because of good rapport of the team, which I'm very thankful for. So I'd like to close with this. Change is a journey, and to meet needs that are larger than ourselves, we'll have to come on board eventually. I'm really thankful for this privilege to be a forerunner to experience it with my team. So will you join me? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Esther, for encouraging your fellow practitioners in creating new roles in their own agencies and sharing the experience that HCSA have actually gone through with the volunteer role redesign. Thank you so much. All right, next up we have Sim Tiong Kian, the Chief of the Silver Generation Office at the Agency for Integrated Care. He will be sharing with us how the role of Silver Generation Ambassador is being redesigned so that they are better equipped to support the health of the seniors in Singapore better. Again, the slides will be shared with you after today's event, and do keep your question for TK coming through in the Slido using the Q&A tab on Slido itself. Also, do send in the question for Esther. Both Esther and TK will be answering your questions after this. Right, let me hand the mic over to TK. Over to you, TK.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, I hope everyone can hear me fine. Yeah, very encouraged to see the very strong turnout this morning. I think it just shows the amount of interest on this subject of volunteering, managing volunteers. Yeah, I have some slides to share, and in the interest of time, I'll go through very quickly so as to leave some time for discussion subsequently. All right. Yeah, just to start, an introduction on SGO. Yeah, so we are part of the Agency for Integrated Care, or AIC. And really our mission is to create a vibrant care community for people, families, seniors to live well and age well in, right? So Silver Generation Office is the outreach arm of AIC. We were previously known as the Pioneer Generation Office, and we were set up in 2014. We have approximately 500 staff deployed across the island and supported by more than 3,000 SGAs, right? Our Silver Generation Ambassadors, right? Okay. I'll talk a bit about their role in subsequent slides. Next. This slide sort of shows SGO's mission through the years. So we started in 2014. We were created really to provide last mile communication on the Pioneer Generation package, right, which was rolled out for Pioneer Generation in 2014. And then in subsequent years, we helped communicate various government schemes that were rolled out progressively to seniors, right? In 2018, we were merged with AIC, and we were renamed the Silver Generation Office, or SGO, right? And then in 2019, we helped to promote the Merdeka Generation package to the Merdeka Generation. And then, of course, the last 2 years, we were all consumed and occupied by various COVID-related operations, right? That culminated in the vaccination ops comms in 2021. And then this year, 2022, we rolled out what we call preventive health visits, which I will explain later. Right, next. Right, yeah, so we have 17 satellite offices, one in each GRC. We are organized by electoral boundaries, okay, and are supported by another 3 outposts. Next. So through our volunteers, we have conducted actually more than 1.5, 1.6 million engagements since our inception, okay, and engaged more than 670,000 unique seniors through the years. Right, and obviously a lot of our work wouldn't have been possible without the help of volunteers. Okay. During the pandemic, last 2 years, these were some of our operations, right? We reached out to the vulnerable seniors, especially, right, to make sure that they are well taken care of during the circuit breaker period. Make sure that their needs were met, the medications were delivered, stuff like that. We called more than 100,000 seniors to check in on them, obviously, because face-to-face engagements were not possible. And then we also helped distribute 10,000 Trace Together tokens when it was first launched in 2020. Right. In 2021, we worked together with PA, People's Association, right, to promote vaccination operations to seniors. So we reached out to more than 700,000 seniors and scheduled more than 14,000 home vaccinations, reminder calls. We escorted seniors to vaccination centers back and forth. And then when the home recovery program was launched, we also helped SAF and MOH support the seniors who were recovering at home, make sure that their meals, their needs were met. Next. Now, so why did we have to redesign our role? Right? I think the pandemic sort of, reinforced our value, our mission, that actually we can go beyond communicating government schemes, right, to doing a lot more. So there are just three factoids that I'm going to show here. One is really the rising healthcare costs, partly driven by the very rapid aging society, right? You all know the statistics, 1 in 6 Singaporeans are, above 65 and above currently, but come 2030, it's going to be 1 in 4. And this picture on the left shows, many of us may not recall, but early 2012, 2013, this was the kind of scene in the hospitals, right? There were just not enough hospital beds. So makeshift wards were, created in passageways, any available space in the hospital. And we can continue to build hospitals, but not many of us realize that actually it takes $1 million to set up one hospital bed, right? And to run the hospital bed, right? So a 1,000-bed hospital, for example, will cost the government $1 billion, both to set up and then to operate it in subsequent years, right? And then the chart on the right shows the exponential rise in national healthcare expenditure. So much so that I think we all know that healthcare is probably overtaken defense already, right? Yeah, so clearly it's not sustainable. Next. This slide shows 4 numbers. I think we're all familiar with this, 85, 74. 85 is our average lifespan of Singaporeans now. It may have gone up or down, I'm not sure, but 85 is the lifespan. But the problem is with the health span, right? It's only 74, which means from 75 onwards, people, start to get frail, start to get, health issues. Your quality of life starts to go down, right? But the good thing is that actually 60% of that, right, is actually caused by social, behavioral, and environmental factors. So if you ask me, 60% of it can actually be, controlled, right? If we have the right health behaviors, we lead healthy lifestyles, we can potentially increase our health span, right? Okay, next. The other issue is, of course, with our rapidly aging society is also that increasingly more and more seniors are living alone, right? So there's this projection by CNA, by 2030, there's a projection that 83,000 seniors will be living alone, so that's going to be about 10% of the senior population, right? So this is, I think, the result of shrinking family units, right? As people grow, families live apart, many Singaporeans do live in other countries, work in other countries, or even if they're in the same country, due to their busy lifestyle, sometimes they don't have enough time for their elderly parents. So this is increasingly a phenomenon, and we know that with self-isolation comes risk, right? You get mental health issues, you get, your chronic conditions may get worse, and it leads to a host of issues. So I think we also want to help address this. Right. So it's with all these in mind that SGO decided to go upstream. How can we contribute to what we call preventive health, right? I mean, we know our strengths in engaging, communicating with seniors. We have over the years built a relationship with them. They trust us. They know where our role, they know where we come from. They know our role. So we are looking at, can we go upstream to leverage our strengths to communicate health, and health tips, and nudge through our relationships with the seniors. Can we nudge them to lead healthy, active lives? Those with chronic conditions, can we encourage them to deal with them? Those who need help, then of course we provide the necessary support in terms of helping them to navigate our very complex health and social care systems, and make sure that they get the necessary assistance, be it a government scheme or active aging activity or health support. Okay. Next. So with preventive health visits, or PHV in short, actually what we strive to do is try to understand seniors, right? Instead of in the past, we are pretty good at sussing out what is the matter with seniors, right? And then dishing out advice. Going forward, we really want to know what matters to seniors, and then customizing our communications, right, and our advice based on the seniors' needs and aspirations. So of course, it starts by building trust, okay, with the seniors, and then through that nudging changes of behavior, right, towards preventive health. And then in the process, we hope to, of course, delay frailty, manage conditions, right, or delay frailty, and then help seniors build self-management abilities. If they have health or social skills, then help them to address them effectively. Okay. And part of that, like I said, is really to help connect and navigate, help the seniors navigate, or the healthcare providers also navigate, right, our systems, so that they get the necessary support. And through this role redesign, of course, volunteers play a very crucial role. Our community partners also, right? Because obviously SGO or AIC can't do all this alone. We depend a lot on the community partners like yourselves, right, to touch, hold, and care for our seniors, right? So part of the preventive health visits role redesign is also redesign of SGO's mission and roles, okay, as illustrated by this particular slide. Okay, next. Right. So to summarize, right, actually what it means for volunteers is that we are moving away from scheme-based kind of communication to one where we are promoting preventive health messages, right? We are going from sussing out what matters, what's the matter with seniors, and then dishing out some, very top-down, paternalistic kind of, advice to really understanding what matters to seniors, and then customizing our communications based on their needs and aspirations, right? We're also moving away from just communicating role to a more sensing role. Can we be better in sensing seniors' needs? When we step into a senior's home, can we look at the environment and see, well, actually seniors might need certain help in certain areas, right? Rather than just communicating schemes, right? For us, our change management really starts with clear communication and realignment of expectations with our volunteers, okay, and of course supported by robust training, which I'll touch a bit on in the next slides. Okay. We are also moving towards more tiered volunteers because obviously, as we carry out preventive health, it is really beyond communication, right? We will need all sorts of volunteers to help us support the seniors. I mentioned earlier, for example, beyond communication, we also check in on them. We deliver food. We make errand runs for seniors. We escort seniors for, to their medical appointments or for vaccinations, So clearly we need a spectrum of different types of volunteers to perform different tasks, right? But it's really not about admin tasks, but really some of the tasks that are aligned with what the SGAs, the volunteers themselves want to do, right, in terms of supporting seniors. Next. Right. Yeah, so our volunteer management framework is based on these elements that you see on the left. Really, it's about recruitment, rejuvenation and engagement, and then of course the recognition. It's a constant process, right? We never stop. We never stop recruiting. We never stop engaging and recognizing the volunteers. It's a 24/7 effort, right? It's not a 5-day thing, but it's a really 24/7, 365-day continuous effort, right? And while we have a team of volunteer managers, a dedicated team of 5 staff headed by a head of VM, supported by 4 executives, really on the ground, they are supported by 400 volunteer managers, in inverted commas, right? These are our regular staff. On a day-to-day basis, we depend on our staff to constantly engage the SGAs, handhold them in the volunteering process, training alongside them, and getting them to carry out engagement. And post-engagement, sitting down with them, having a coffee, and to just reinforce, their work and their value, right? So this is what our staff do on a daily basis. Okay, this slide shows the profile of our volunteers, 3,000 plus volunteers. Yeah, as I think most of you would expect, most are females, right? And most of them are seniors themselves, right? So the vast majority are in the 50s and above, right? A lot of them speak 2 or 3 languages, which helps a lot because a lot of seniors actually don't speak English or even Mandarin, right? But they speak, I mean, the vernacular languages as well as dialects. Yeah. Okay. Next. In terms of training, yeah, this is our sort of like training framework. It's a 10% classroom learning, 20% social. So it's a hybrid kind of learning. It's both classroom as well as e-learning, and then a lot of hand holding, a lot of hands-on role play, on the job training, a lot of buddying by staff. And then after that, once the SGAs are comfortable and confident in carrying out engagement, then we let them operate on their own. But even after that, like I said, there are constant check-ins and constant renewals. We conduct a lot of learning days, webinars, classroom training throughout the year in order to upskill and engage our SGAs. Right, I think that is my last slide. Yeah, yeah. So we will share these slides with you, and if you have any questions, we'll be happy to take them.
Thank you so much, TK, for sharing your perspective and experience of the Silver Generation Office in redesigning the ambassador's role to support the seniors' health better. I'm going to now invite the 3 speakers once again back on screen so that we can have you for a panel discussion. We will have Rupali, Esther, and TK joining us in this panel discussion. And as you listen to the panel discussion and you reflect on what is being shared by Esther and TK, and even earlier by Rupali, if you have questions, please do send them into the Slido itself. We will extract those relevant questions that the speakers will answer in today's session itself. Okay, let's have everyone back here. Hope you are also inspired by each other's presentation itself. And I'm going to start with 2 questions for Esther and TK first, because your sharing is a bit more related to each other. Maybe I can hear from TK and Esther first. This going back to the earlier point about buying in, right? There are 3 groups of people that you have to have buy-in from each time you redesign your volunteer role. The first one is your volunteer, second one is your program staff, your agency staff, and the third one is service user. Maybe I'll start with Esther and TK. What are some of the process in order to have the buy-in from your volunteers? Because TK and Esther, your volunteers are slightly different. So maybe I'll start with TK first. What are some of the key steps you think has helped the buy-in from the volunteers stronger?
Yeah, I'll say that it starts with, if you ask me, it starts with the staff. At least for me, it was the staff, having clarity of our roles, having that conversation, within the SGO management, and then subsequently involving the staff, right? Every staff needs to agree and, that we need to change, right? First of all, SGO's role. And SGO's role clearly has evolved, has transformed over the years, right? Recognizing our strengths and then recognizing the need that actually we can do a lot more. But of course, that does take a lot of quite a bit of convincing, right? Also, there were multiple roadshows and town halls that we conducted internally to staff to get buy-ins. After we made the case, staff were on board. Then after that, it was getting the SGAs on board, right? So we came out with a lot of communications material. We conducted webinars, town halls, to engage the SGAs and to explain why we needed to do this, So I'll say there's a lot of publicity that went into it. It was really curating, developing, stories, the impact of our work to show both staff and SGAs why we needed to do this, and by doing this, how it actually benefits seniors. Because at the end of the day, the volunteers are here to really serve and support seniors, right? They are here because of that passion. We need to sort of relate whatever changes we want to do back to that passion, right? That how this fulfills actually helps you meet your aspiration. The other aspiration that actually we know that SGAs, our volunteers, have is the desire for lifelong learning, right? Yeah, because a lot of them are seniors themselves. They want to continue to stay engaged, healthy. They want to learn new things. So along with this pivoting to this new role, it is the assurance that will be there for them, right? There will be all this training support, webinars, learning days, e-modules, a lot of hand-holding that will be put in place to support the SGAs,
Right. Okay, so you do have the buy-in and the change management process. Thank you for that. Esther?
Yeah, thanks, Brian, for the question. So actually there are really 3 layers, right? Like from the staff, the senior management, the volunteers, and even those that they impact. So in my case, I shared that one of the very key person to have the buy-in is really the head of the SPIN program, because that was where we initiated the lead ally befriender role. So I think it was more of taking her through the process, but the idea of wanting to have this role, it was already something that was there at the start. Yeah, so I think that buy-in was kind of really strong from there, from the outset. Another thing is also to get a buy-in from the lead volunteers, right? When we actually invited them to come on board. So I think one of the things that the staff really thought through was to invite from within, for those who have already been observed to have been role models, to do well in the role, and now would they like to serve in a greater capacity, and also giving them the assurance, the clarity on what the role entails, so that they will feel that they are being supported. Yeah, and also finally, it's the befrienders who they will lead. They need to actually meet this lead and kind of like affirm that that is who I want to be led by. Yeah.
And still with Esther and TK, I'm sure there would be some volunteers who are resisting to changes, as our participants have actually said in their poll earlier at the registration itself. They are resistant to changes. How do you deal with volunteers or even staff who might show resistance to these changes or adaptation? Esther, you want to go first?
Okay, yeah, sure. Resistant to change. I think one of the consideration under the risk, right, that we were led to also think through in the process was that, well, maybe if you appointed a befriender who is a role model, but probably she's quite new compared to someone who has been around for many years, but maybe in terms of the quality, might not be what the staff was looking for. Yeah, so that was one thing we considered. So I think what was really key was that we actually introduced them to each other and at the meeting, like a Zoom meeting, so that they are able to acknowledge. Yeah, but I think at the same time, before we even added them into the group, we always had a one-to-one. Yeah, the staff had a one-to-one with this individual. So I think that helped to, reduce any pushback. Yeah.
TK, yourself?
Yeah, so for us, I think the first thing is to try to understand the challenges the SGAs face. I think for us, yeah, so we hold our SGAs to certain standards, right? As long as you have the right values and the desire to serve, we want to keep you, right? So sometimes, yeah, so when we embark on this, it is indeed true that some SGAs were reluctant to change, right? Because they were so used to one mode of volunteering or engagement. Now you ask them to go upstream to communicate preventive health visit kind of messages, right? It's really quite a big challenge for some of them. So the first thing we try to do is actually to engage them and understand the challenges that they're encountering. So some of them, it could be that they don't take too well to say e-learning, because a lot of the course training contents are on e-modules, right? So for this group, so we help more maybe classroom kind of sessions for them, right? Some of them could not handle the systems. I think Rupali did mention, so for this, could we spend more time with them, right? In practice using, the tablets, or instead of e-collaterals, could we print out hard copies for them, So it's really trying to understand the challenges that they face and then helping them to overcome them. Then if after all this, the SGA still feel that, they can't perform these new roles, then this is where the tiered volunteers come in. That's why we are trying to expand our offerings. It's no longer one type of volunteering role, but multiple roles, right? So if you don't want to conduct, for example, preventive health visits, could you help us perform check-ins on seniors? Could you help us, make errand runs, escort seniors, So it's still volunteering, right? It's still serving, supporting seniors, but in a different capacity, right? So it's trying to match these volunteers' aspirations, different roles, right? And then, yeah, so, and then finally, if after all this still cannot, right, then I think we probably then have to say, okay, we have to part ways, right? Yeah, so, yeah, so we do have an exit mechanism also, right? Yeah.
Right. So it sounds like you try as far as possible, try to retain the volunteer, even if they don't want to take on the new roles. But if really does all things fail, you might just have the process for them to leave the team. Yeah. Okay. I'll direct this question. It's kind of related to what TK just shared to Rupali. In your earlier presentation itself, you have the triangle, right, showing the process, the technology, and the job redesign. I think Esther and TK cover quite a lot about the redesigning of the role itself. Rupali, can I get you to share a bit more? Why is it the process and technology adaptation is also important in job redesign?
Wonderful. So I think the why is to me sounds very simple, right? There is that much humans can do. There are definitely opportunities as you go through your redesign. There are definitely opportunities. Admin came up even as you were facilitating the session, right? There are admin activities, there's documentation. There's sometimes, and I've seen even triplicate documentation. You start asking people, why do you do this? Or, why is this part of the process? It comes down to the regulator wants it, whether the regulator doesn't or what, or its legacy, or this is the way it's always been done. These three are the most common reasons for things that are done in good intention. Nobody says, let me find ways to waste my time today. People come in with a good intention. But as we see a lot of things that require detailed documentation, detailed sharing of information with each other, there's some aspect of technology that comes in there. There are some areas where just the process flow, and again it would help me if there's a very specific example. I'm very tangible and visual, but let's say something comes in somebody reviews it, sends to someone else for a decision, waits for the decision. There are all of these. This is a process implication of where there is time spent in either waiting. There is time spent in doing certain tasks the way they are done, like they are always done. And it helps to just step back, look at it objectively, ask yourself, how can this be done better? Is this even necessary to be done? And that first question of, is this necessary, really has an implication on both process as well as technology. And once you integrate all of that, when people are doing what people are best at doing, that is either relational or expertise kind of tasks, when people are doing more of where they're adding value, which is removing unnecessary steps, unnecessary documentation, or automating some of that, that's how that trio and that trilogy kind of really comes together to add value to the people, to the job through process. Sometimes it's even equipment. It doesn't have to be digitization. It could even be equipment that helps do a job better. Lifting, in a community care kind of setting, we've seen lifting patients, helps both patients as well as staff. Because a lot of the people and volunteers you're working with, if they're doing, let's say, hospital escort duties, and if they're pushing chairs, they are not young themselves, right? So if they have that lumbar support belt that augments and enables their physical health and well-being, that just helps with the role and the job.
Right. Definitely helpful to hear the perspective. I completely agree with you. There are a lot of times in many of the work we have seen in SSA, we help SSA in process improvement. A lot of times it was done the way it was done. So a lot of people might not actually know why they're doing things the way that it is being done. I'm going to open this question to three of you. In your own experience for TK and Esther, having to see volunteer role redesign journey in your own agencies, what is the one key challenge that you face? Let me just rephrase it. What is the one key challenge that you experience, and what is in your own experience, what is the most effective way of overcoming it? Directly TK first, Esther, and then I'll come to Upali.
Well, if you ask me, I'll say it's probably the ability to juggle your primary role as a staff and managing the volunteers, the SGAs under you. I think management can do a lot in terms of comms, getting buy-in, but at the end of the day, it's the ability of the staff to handle, the day-to-day, requirements, right, of their job. And then at the same time managing volunteers, because that is not their primary role. Right? Yeah. So I find, so it's how management then comes in to help the staff prioritize and understand what are some of the obstacles, challenges on the ground, and then try to, smoothen that process, and work together. Yeah. If
I remember correctly, you have 4 staff handling 400 volunteers.
Staff, but I really depend on the staff on the ground to help manage the 3,000 volunteers, right? Yeah. So so it's a constant juggling act.
Okay. Yeah. So the staff also need to be equipped to translate your change management materials into on-ground composition piece.
Yeah, and I can imagine for the SSAs even harder, right? Because your staffing is very, unlike SGO, we are fortunate, we have a lot more resources, but I can imagine for a lot of the SSAs, staffing is very lean, very tight. You have multiple roles, and on top of that, you have to manage your volunteers. So it's really not easy. Yeah, I really respect you all for that.
Thanks, TK. Esther?
Yeah, actually, I really am very aligned with what TK shared about, the work behind, right, how to juggle. Because I think if you recall this time when I was sharing about the offline work that we had to do in between the touch points, well, I mean, really that is not easy. And the offline work, it involved a lot of coordination also with the staff, like getting the buy-in. And also it really depends, in order to update, right, in the next milestone, it means that also there has to be progress in the pilot. And because it's new, it's a pilot, there were a lot of teething challenges, like even the engagement on the ground. So that was also one of the main challenges. Of course, I paced myself. I kind of like try to engage the staff early, but no matter what, that only helps to a certain extent. Yeah, so that's something that we had to manage along the way.
So very much on change management, right? It's
Yeah.
somewhat seems like it's easier to design the role, but actually the change itself is the hardest piece. Rupali, your thoughts around that?
Well, it's very hard to choose one. Second, if one has to choose one, it definitely is change management, all aspects, right? And I can balance that as if I put myself in the shoes of the consultant, where do I see, it's also easy to take an objective outside view, right? Where do I see a lot of challenge? It's in exactly those 2 points TK and Esther brought together, right? It's the speed and the pace of implementation. It's the commitment of the stakeholders, and that is back to change management. The commitment is, at the top, it's very easy. Top leaders are typically committed. Yes, we need to do this. Yes, there's a business benefit. Let's go do it. What changes is in the middle and down the line. In the middle, it's really around how do I rally the right support? People are busy. More so in your sector, people are even more busy because they are leaner. They don't have the luxury or the capacity to, like a multinational, get a contract person and say, okay, you're going to run this project. So because you're lean, people have got both a BAU, which is their day job, as well as a special project to run. And either one gets impacted. Let's take a guess. The special project gets more impacted than the daily job, right? And then down to the individual, it's back to how do we maintain, keep the momentum of change is painful. None of us like it. Why are we doing this? What's the purpose? What's your role? What's your contribution? And how do we all make this better in the longer run? Those are really the two very specifics of change management down to individual commitment. That is the largest challenge.
Thanks, Rupali. And I think it's about time that we can go answer some of the questions from the audience. There are quite a few directed to the TK already. But I'm going to ask one question that's not included here, but was in the earlier question for TK. This has got to do with the profile of the volunteers. I think in all the volunteer management network that I work on, people have been asking them, how do we equip senior volunteers with IT skills? What's your experience in SGO? How do you equip your seniors? Because I know that the seniors are expected to work with tablets.
Yeah, it's a constant challenge, lah. Yeah. So I'll make no bones of the fact that we do recognize that certain profiles of seniors, right? I think they come with more needs, more requirements, So for this group, I'll say that there's a lot of one-to-one, a lot of hand-holding. We need a lot of patience, and we really need to understand their learning styles, right? What works for them, and how to balance. Because in a training classroom, right, you have both ends of the spectrum. I have a young graduates, students who are volunteers. I have retirees in their 70s who also want to volunteer, right? So the pace of the training has to be, calibrated to suit, the diverse needs. And then for the second group, actually, we do augment our training, right? Sometimes we have to have more one-to-one sessions with them, more classroom sessions with them. Because like I said, a lot of them, they don't take too well to e-learning. And we put them through, like, for example, the OJT. It means more OJTs, more one-to-one kind of hand-holding, right, by a regular staff or a more seasoned, experienced volunteer, So when we go out for engagements, we'll pair them, right, with, say, a staff or more experienced SGA. And then letting them practice on the tablet. We're also looking at enhancing the features on the tablet. So for example, we currently, SGAs are required to take down case notes, right? Because obviously when you engage a senior, there'll be many issues that you need to document, and for some of these SGAs to key into a tablet is not so easy. So we are already through, say, through the selection of certain answers, the case notes will already start to populate, certain sentences, right? So the SGA just needs to click on the particular sentence that makes sense, to them, right? So it takes a lot of the writing way, right? We're also trying to explore speech to scribe, kind of technology, whether that's possible, and then of course, like I said, instead of more e-material, we are looking at things like flashcards, hard copies, for this group of SGAs. Yeah. So it is not an easy process, but we constantly, have to work at it, right? And constantly practice, because I think a lot of it comes with practice also, right? I think we all have senior parents and all that, it's always a challenge, right? To ask them, to teach them to use a smartphone. So same thing with our SGA, yeah. So we constantly have to teach them, handhold them, and then practice.
Thanks, TK. I think that that a lot of the SSA practitioner here will find this very, very helpful as well for hearing from your experience. Maybe I'll open it to a question to the three of you. Again, this one probably I can start with Esther, then TK, and Upali from a quote-unquote outsider view, right? So one of the earlier question is actually how about the phenomenon of a volunteer life cycle. People come in excited, they contribute, and then they sort of business out their interest. And how do you think volunteer role redesign can help to manage this volunteer life cycle issues on hand? Esther?
Just like really thinking from end to end, right? The whole
Yes.
life cycle, right? Yeah. Not an easy question, I must say. Yeah. So the question is about retaining them, getting them excited. So I guess maybe at the start, they could be really excited because it's something new. It's like giving them that privilege to expand their role or change the scope, whichever, right? Depends on whether it's enrichment or, yeah. But I guess one of the things would be really the ongoing check-ins with them. Yeah, that can be already planned at the start and even discuss with them if that's something they're comfortable with. Yeah. Because I think check-ins and constant encouragement is something that is really key to keep them in the long haul. And sometimes, like, I think I shared the example of someone who was already committed at the start, but because she had to be relocated, or someone else who had other volunteering activities and she got busy. So things change along the way. So apart from checking in about their role, it could be also their life or some changes. Some may initiate to share, but others it's better to actually check in with them. They also feel appreciated and noticed. Yeah.
Okay, so it's also really about adapting to some of their own individual circumstances and see if you can redesign some roles for them based on those changes, if I'm hearing correctly.
Yeah, I mean, if it's possible to adapt accordingly and they can still stay on the role, that is ideal. Because if they are already chosen because they will do well, we hope to keep this person. Yeah,
Right.
but if really you find that it's too difficult, then at least they have the conversation early. Yeah, and then you can build a succession pipeline for someone else. Yeah.
Yep. TK, what about yourself? How do you think role redesign can help to retain volunteers? Because I think your role design comes from a slightly different objective compared to HCSA. What's your thought?
Yeah, so obviously as mentioned in my brief, we needed to go upstream, right? So that was the impetus for redesigning our role. But I think to your question is also about offering more diverse volunteering roles and opportunities to the SGAs. So for those who have been with us sometime and they want to take on a different role or they can't adapt and upskill to carry out PHV, we will have other roles for them, right? So for example, if some of them are physically, because as they age, they can't walk as much, right? They can't climb, HDB flats and all that. So we could re-roll them to carry out tele-engagements instead, right? Some of them, like I said, instead of carrying out a full preventive health visit, which may take 1 hour, right, to engage a senior, some of them could perhaps, do errand runs, deliver meals, or just do a medical escort, right, which just takes half an hour or something like that. So it's about offering different types of volunteering opportunities to the volunteers. I'll also say that a very important part is about the recognition. So we, besides by, as I mentioned, the constant engagement of the SGAs. We also have happiness study surveys that we conduct every year to check in on them, where are they in terms of their happiness, satisfaction levels, volunteering with us. We also have anniversary events. Every year we'll conduct SGO anniversaries where we dish out service awards to the volunteers. So we have a 2, 3, 5-year award. So we are looking at 10 years already because SGO, obviously now we are already into our 8th year. We have exemplary awards. So all this to recognize their contributions and motivate them, right? During these events, we actually invite our GRAs, our POHs, our stakeholders to attend so that, at the highest levels, everyone is recognizing the volunteers. I think this helps to motivate them. So we have volunteers who have been with us from day one, so 8 years, still with us, still going strong. So we are quite blessed in that, but like I said, I think really it's about constantly communicating to them the impact of our work, so we do share with them success stories, how some of their work has translated to directly impacting, changing the lives of seniors, right? I think that keeps them going, right? Yeah, so much so that some of them even involve their kids, grandkids, to sign up as SGAs themselves, so yeah, so we constantly try to do it this way, because I think it from the cost effectiveness point of view, it's a lot easier for us to retain volunteers than to constantly recruit and train new ones. Yeah.
Thank you, TK. Rupali, I'm going to ask you a slightly different question, and this is not much talked about in the presentation so far, but I just want to hear your thoughts around looking at existing jobs by the staff in the SSA and creating micro volunteer jobs for that. Any thoughts around that?
Wonderful. It's a problem that everybody wants to solve, a solution that nobody has so far. And really, the reason the solution doesn't exist is, when most people say micro jobs, that's what in my presentation I kind of talked about: task, project, and gig. Project being a larger unit because it's finite, has a time, it has a specific scope. Tasks and gigs are more in that micro job kind of a space, right? For example, again, let's take a hotel. Most of us have been users of a hotel. Some of the kinds of micro jobs we're looking at, especially when you think about housekeeping, not enough people, obviously not a space where volunteers are going to turn up because it's not engaging, empowering, there is no heart for the sector of I'm going to come in and clean rubbish bins, for example, right? It doesn't have the same buzz that a volunteer in the case that we've been discussing has. So when you think about that as a micro task that needs to get done, depending on the business model of different hotels, we've seen, they have, especially when it's a family resort with families staying, they have large rubbish that doesn't necessarily fit into the bins in the rooms. That's where they have this micro kind of a job of somebody who's just clearing all the rubbish from the rooms so that the housekeeping task time goes down, total time to turn around the room, right? Which is an important productivity metric. Now, if I translate that into a micro job for, some of the social contexts that we work in, a pantry helper, somebody who comes and cooks rice, micro job, that's all they do. They come in for 1 hour a day, cook rice, probably help serve, go away. The problem is not in the crafting of the role. Really where the problem lies in how do we find someone who's willing to come in either every day, or how do we find a pool of people that is willing to cook rice between 11 to 12, because lunchtime is 12, in a predictable fashion and manner. And how do we then generate the predictability of, if my core person is away, somebody else is stepping in and doing it. So it's really the communication and the flow of people, almost like a platform, right? When we think about Grab, Grab has been able to reach out to those drivers, create a predictable approach and platform where they can come in, they get trained, they get validated to say, okay, this person cooks reasonable rice, is not raw, is blah, blah, blah with criteria, right? So creating micro jobs which have a low entry barrier, because we want them to be able to, pick up very quickly. So we need a low entry barrier, We need predictability and scale. And that's really where the hard part is. Designing a micro job is the easiest.
Mm. Right. So it sounded like there's also opportunity if you can find the right people who come in the right time, right? Okay. Any maybe before we end the Q&A, I'll end this with a question for the three of you. What would be one thing you would say to the SSA, the audience, and who are also working in the SSAs, who are keen on embarking on a volunteer role redesign? What would be one thing they would share with them? Maybe I'll hear from you, three of you.
I almost feel like going first, so I don't feel like an outsider anymore.
Okay, please go ahead.
So my one bit of advice, right? Doing nothing is harder than doing something. We've all established that this is an uphill journey. It takes a lot of effort. It takes time. But if you do nothing, if you stay with the situation you're going to be in 1, 2, 3 years down the road, that's only going to be harder than doing something. So sign up, figure out, and seek the support you have through your peers, through the wonderful community that you have access to. My only advice is do something, get on a change. You've got access. You're one of the few sectors who have access to volunteers, where you have people willing to come in and do work for you, which most other sectors don't have the luxury of. So just make the most of it is my view.
Thank you, Rupali. Esther?
Yeah, I mean, in this journey, sometimes plans may get delayed. Outcomes may not really meet expectations. So, well, let's face it, but really to just keep believing in the best of others, and also to just find that alignment with them, whether it's internally, with staff, or with your stakeholders, the volunteers, and you get there eventually. Yeah.
Thank you, Esther.
Yeah, I think Rupali has provided the textbook answer, right? So, okay, I think for me, I'll say you need a lot of to be persistent and stay committed, right? You have to do this, right? Because if you don't do this and you kick this problem down the road, actually you'll never solve your organization's longer term needs. Yeah, so you need to invest in it, see it through. And you need the support, definitely. Yeah, so do speak to your management to get the necessary support, whether in terms of resources or if not, then in terms of prioritization, right, of your work. The other areas that you can deprioritize in order to do this, because you're really investing and building for the future. Yeah, if you don't do it right now, I think you'll never be able to fulfill your needs, right? Organizationally, you always be depending on your current staff to do your work, right? Which is not sustainable also.
Right. Thank you so much, Rupali, Esther, and TK for your wonderful presentation and sharing of your thoughts with the audience today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us,
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sure there will be more questions coming in. If there are questions coming through in the Q&A modules, we will send it to you, and we will gather your thoughts around and so that we can circulate it back to the audience. Thank you again so much. Right, so we are coming to the tail end of the event itself. Maybe we could get some post-event reflections from you after hearing from our audience. Before you drop off, do stay on with us so that we can hear your thoughts around what is being shared today. Can I get you to go on to Slido using the QR code or the browser and help us answer this first question first. This is specific to Esther and TK's sharing about their journey towards redesigning volunteer role. What do you feel about that? Right, do stay on after this. We also want you to give us a quick reflection on how you feel about today's event. So it looks like across the board, everyone has taken away something from Esther and TK's sharing. Much like what we have also heard about Rupali, that's a takeaway for each of you. Right, I'll give you another maybe 2 minutes to fill this up.
Have you ever been in love? Have you ever lost your head?
Okay,
Have you felt like you were
mindful of time, I'm eating into your lunchtime, and I'm going to ask you to respond to us some of the basic questions from the reflection of our event today. The voice about the content, we want to hear from you whether the content is structured, well structured, is it intended for what you have want to receive, and what are some of the, is there any learning from today's session that you can apply in your own role, as well as to share with your organizations. And do let us know what has done well, all right, and what can be improved. In each of those sessions, we have always wanting to have a good mix of different activities and also different speakers. So let us know whether the lineup of the speakers as well as the activity, whether it's something that works for you or not, so they can do a better network the next round.
got that feeling in your arms and knees, the kind of feeling where you simply freeze. Don't you worry, let me throw you up, 'cause I think I know where you always.
Thank you so much for staying with us. Your feedback will be very helpful for us to shape the next volunteer management network. So really appreciate you sending in your thoughts to it so far.
But there are things you don't let people see. Open up and hammer down the wall, and all the fighting and just let it fall. My love is real and it's not just for the season. Here's what I feel, I don't need a better reason. You broke your heart and come use mine. My love will last, it'll stand the test of time. When I reach you and you feel.
All right, so we have gotten about 40 plus response so far. Thank you so much for giving us your responses. I'm going to move on. I'm quite glad that most of you feel that the content is what you have expected to receive, and you have some takeaway that you can actually learn and apply in your own role or in your own organizations. Thank you for letting us know how the speakers are, and I'm quite glad that the hands-on activity was with a large group of you. It's engaging, something that we are trying to experiment how to make each of those network interesting for you. All right, and what are some of the things that we can improve on? Okay, we can actually do a lot more. Right, so I'm mindful of time. Now we are actually going to have, just turn down my background music first. In the next event that we're going to do with you, next volunteer management network will be on the 18th January 2023. So we're taking a roughly 2 months break for us to plan and have right speakers for the next event itself. So do look out for our publicity EDM so that you can register ahead and get the links for our event for this January event next year. All right, if not, thank you so much for taking time to join us and our speakers today at today's event. We'll see you next round. Take care.